After 45 years in the same house, the house where I carried my wife across the threshold, where my children learned to walk, where laughter and tears carved themselves into the walls, my son walked in with strangers. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look around as if this was still my home. Instead, he spread his arms wide like some proud owner and said to them, "This is the living room. It'll be easy to remodel." I stood there, frozen. They followed him through my kitchen, my bedroom, even the backyard where I planted the oak tree the year he was born. And then he turned to me, his voice sharp, almost cold. "Pack fast, Dad. We're selling." 45 years of sacrifice, dismissed in a single sentence. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with restraint, because I wanted to shout, to ask him who gave him the right, but I didn't. I stayed silent. I let him talk. I let him dig his own grave with every careless word. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that silence can be sharper than anger. And in my drawer, waiting patiently, was a folder. A folder with papers that could turn his confidence into trembling. Papers that would remind him this house was not his trophy to sell. It was my legacy. And legacies don't bow to greed. Before I go further, let me say this. Welcome, my friends. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. It's not always easy for an old man to share his wounds, but stories like mine aren't just about me. They're about all of us, about how age, love, and betrayal collide in ways we never expect. Some of you listening know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be told you don't matter anymore, just because the years have creased your skin or slowed your step. People forget the sacrifices that built the very ground they stand on. Tell me, has anyone ever looked at you and acted like your worth was gone? As if your age erased your value? Share it in the comments. I'd like to read your story too, because sometimes we elders carry more pain than people realize. This isn't just a tale of bricks and wood. It's about respect, about memory, and about a son who thought he could erase everything with a signature. So stay with me, listen carefully, and let my silence teach you what words never could. Because before this night is over, you'll see why arrogance trembled in the face of truth. Now let me tell you about the people in my life. The ones who shaped the story you're about to hear. My wife, God rest her soul, was the heart of this home. She was the kind of woman who could turn four walls into a sanctuary. The smell of her Sunday roast lingered for days, and her laugh, it still echoes in these rooms when the night is quiet. She made this house more than shelter. She made it a promise. My children grew up under this roof. My son, the same one who would later bring strangers to tour it, once ran barefoot down the hallway, chasing after his sister with a wooden toy plane. He used to crawl into my lap and say, "Dad, when I'm big, I'll take care of you." Back then, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. To the neighbors, we were the picture of a proud American family, hardworking parents, happy children, and a house filled with love. But you see, the outside never shows you the cracks forming inside. Over time, my son's laughter changed. His eyes shifted from gratitude to ambition. His wife came into the picture, polite at first, smiling wide, calling me Dad, but slowly her words turned sharper, colder. She would whisper in corners, glancing at the family photos on the wall as though they were clutter, not memories. To the world, they seemed like a modern couple, full of plans and energy. But I could feel it. Their plans didn't include me. Even the neighbors, old friends who watched my kids grow, noticed the change. "He doesn't visit as often, does he?" they'd ask. I would smile, make excuses, say he was busy. I covered for him, even when his distance cut deeper than I let on. Because to outsiders, you never want to show the storm brewing inside your own home. And that's the truth about betrayal. It rarely comes from strangers. It grows quietly in the people you once trusted most, until one day it stands in your living room, smiling like it owns the place. When you live in a house for 45 years, you don't just own it, you bleed into it. I remember the day I first walked through this door with my wife. We had nothing but a second-hand couch, a cracked coffee table, and a promise that we'd build a life worth remembering. The walls were bare, the floors creaked, but we looked at each other and saw a future. Every paycheck I brought home, a piece of it went into this place. I patched the roof after storms, laid new tiles with my own hands, planted the garden out back that still blooms every spring. While others bought shiny things they couldn't keep, I built something solid, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. There were nights I skipped dinner so the kids could have full plates. Days I worked overtime, hands blistered and back aching, just to cover the mortgage. And through it all, this house stood like a witness, holding every tear, every laugh, every secret. In the living room there's an old oak cabinet. Inside it, wrapped in my late wife's scarf, lies the deed. That piece of paper isn't just ink and signatures. It's the story of my life, the proof that every nail driven and every dollar earned wasn't wasted. My wife used to whisper, "Promise me this house will never fall into greedy hands." And I promised her. That promise lived in that folded paper, tucked away all these years, waiting. So when my son stood in that same living room showing strangers around like he was master of this place, he had no idea. No idea that every corner of this house was tied to a sacrifice he never made. No idea that in my silence I was holding something far stronger than his words, a legacy he could never sell. The first sting didn't come from strangers. It came from my own blood. My son. It was a Sunday afternoon. He had come by with his wife. I was in the kitchen, slow with my steps these days, setting the table the way his mother used to. I overheard him sigh, impatient, and then say under his breath, just loud enough for me to catch it, "Dad should really think about moving out of this old place. It's too much for him. He's just slowing down." Slowing down. That's what I'd become to him. Not a father. Not a man who broke his back so he could have college, shoes, chances I never had. No, just a burden in a house he already pictured without me. I swallowed hard, pretending not to hear. I poured the tea, kept my hands steady though my chest burned. His wife nodded along, her eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, like she was measuring the space in her head. She smiled politely at me, but I saw it, that flicker of dismissal. Like I was already gone. I said nothing. I carried the sting the way I carried 1,000 other burdens in my life. But silence is not the same as forgetting. No, I remembered every word, every look, because sometimes it's the smallest cut that teaches you how deep betrayal can really go. Disrespect doesn't come all at once. It drips, little by little, until one day you realize you're standing in a flood. After that Sunday, the stings kept coming, sharper each time. At dinner one evening, I cooked his favorite stew, the kind his mother used to make when he was a boy. He sat at the table, phone in hand, barely looking up. When I offered him a bowl, he smirked and said, "Dad, you should really let restaurants handle this stuff. You're not as quick in the kitchen anymore." His wife laughed softly, covering her mouth. They didn't see the way I gripped the spoon tighter, forcing a smile instead of letting my heart break across the table. Another time, he stood in the garden. My garden, the one I planted with his mother. He pointed at the rose bushes, the tree we planted when he was born, and said this space could be cleared. A pool would add value. Add value. To him, it wasn't a memory. It wasn't the soil that held his mother's hands, or the tree that held his childhood swing. It was dollars and blueprints, and he didn't even blink as he erased decades with a wave of his hand. Then came the betrayal that cut deepest. I trusted him with some old letters his mother wrote before she passed. Precious words, her last wishes, folded neatly for him to hold. A week later, I found them shoved carelessly in the glove compartment of his car, crumpled under fast food wrappers. He had promised to keep them safe, to cherish them. Instead, he treated her words like trash. That night, I sat awake in the living room, staring at the oak cabinet that held the deed. My hand almost reached for it then, almost. But I waited, because timing, I knew, was everything. Each insult, each careless remark, each act of greed, it built a fire inside me. And though I stayed silent, I was counting every strike, letting the suspense tighten like a rope. He thought he was winning. He thought I was too old to fight back. But what he didn't know was that patience is a weapon too, and mine was sharper than he could imagine. Betrayal has a smell to it. You can't see it at first, but you feel it in your bones. A shift in the air, a whisper that doesn't belong. That's how I knew something darker was coming. One evening, I walked past the porch and heard my son's voice carrying in the night. He didn't know I was there. He spoke in low tones to his wife, words like listing, contract, and closing fast. She hushed him, but her laugh was sharp, cold, like they were sharing a secret that didn't include me. When I stepped into the light, they both went quiet, smiling too quickly, like children caught with their hands in the jar. They thought I was too old to notice. They thought I didn't hear. But I heard enough. Then came the missing money. A small amount at first. I keep my savings simple, cash tucked away in envelopes, the old-fashioned way. But one envelope was thinner than it should have been. I asked no questions, said no words, but I counted. And I remembered, because money doesn't vanish on its own. And then the legal papers. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped me outside, a kind man who has always looked out for me. He said, "I saw your boy at the courthouse last week. Looked like he was filing something important." My chest tightened, but I nodded, thanked him, pretended not to care. Inside, though, the truth clawed at me. What was he doing there? What papers was he touching that had anything to do with me? That night, I opened the oak cabinet, pulled out the folder wrapped in my wife's scarf. I held the deed in my hands, my name bold on every page. I traced the ink with my finger, whispering to her memory, "Don't worry, love, he'll learn soon enough." Suspicion had turned into certainty. Something was wrong. And though he thought I was blind, I was already watching, already waiting. Proof doesn't shout. Proof waits in silence until the moment it burns away every lie. The night everything became clear, I wasn't even looking for it. Sometimes the truth finds you when you least expect it. My son had left his briefcase open on the kitchen table after one of his visits. He was in the backyard on the phone, pacing, his voice sharp and eager. I moved slow, but my eyes caught a corner of paper sticking out. I shouldn't have looked, but something in my gut told me I had to. I slid the paper out just enough to read. It was a draft agreement. My house, this house, listed for sale, with his name scribbled clumsily where mine should have been. My chest went cold, my breath heavy. The very son I raised, the boy who once promised to take care of me, was plotting to sell the only thing I had left of his mother and me. I folded it back carefully, just as he left it, and tucked the image into my memory. Later that night, I sat in my chair, staring at the oak cabinet, where the real deed lay wrapped in my wife's scarf. My hand rested on it like it was a weapon I would one day draw. I whispered to her, "He thinks he's clever. He thinks I'm weak. But love, you and I made sure long ago this house couldn't be touched. He'll learn." And just to be certain I did more than look, I started listening. I began keeping a small recorder hidden in my pocket whenever he came by. And soon I caught it, his voice clear as day, telling his wife, "Once Dad's out, the deal will move fast. He won't fight. He can't." Those words, I saved them, burned them into my ears. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. Silence means I'm waiting for the right moment to strike. I never confronted him. I never hinted at what I knew. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and played the role of the frail old man he thought I was. But inside, I carried proof. Paper in the cabinet, his words on tape, his betrayal sealed by his own tongue. And one day soon I knew he'd face every word of it. Let me stop here for a moment and ask you something, my friends. Imagine you're in my shoes. You find proof. The paper that says your own child is planning to sell your home, the very place you built with your hands. You hear his voice, recorded in secret, telling someone you're too old to fight back. What would you have done? Would you have stormed into the kitchen right then, slammed the papers down, and demanded an explanation? Or would you have stayed silent, as I did, letting the betrayal play out, letting the liar believe his plan was working? Tell me in the comments, would you have spoken up, or would you have waited? Because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade, and the longer I stayed quiet, the sharper that blade became. Every storm has a breaking point. Mine came not in private, but in front of others, because betrayal is bold when it thinks you are weak. It was a Sunday dinner. My son had invited me, though it wasn't out of love. I could see it in his eyes, in the way his wife set the table without a place for me at the head. I was a guest in the family I raised. He cleared his throat halfway through the meal, his fork clinking against the glass to silence the chatter. Then he looked straight at me. "Dad, it's time you think about moving out. This house is too big for you. We've already found buyers. They're ready. All you need to do is pack fast, and we'll take care of the rest." His words fell like stones in the room. His wife nodded, smiling as though this was kindness, as though shoving me out of my home was a gift. One of my neighbors, invited without my knowledge, looked down at his plate, uncomfortable. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone but my son, who thought he had me cornered. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't slam my fist, I simply placed my fork down, folded my hands, and looked at him. Steady, silent. My calmness unsettled him more than anger ever could. He shifted in his chair, his voice faltering as he tried to fill the silence. Inside, my blood boiled, but I let it stay hidden. I had learned something long ago. The man who shouts loses his power. The man who waits holds it. And in that moment, though he thought he was winning, it was me who held every card. I let the silence stretch at that dinner table until the air itself grew heavy. My son tried to press on, his words tumbling faster, as though the speed could hide the cruelty. "Dad, this is for your own good. We'll handle everything. You don't need to worry about details. Just pack fast and trust me." Trust. That word cut deeper than any insult. Trust was the rope I had handed him all his life, and now he thought he could hang me with it. I leaned back slowly, my eyes steady on his, and I asked one question. Just one. "Are you sure you have the right to sell my house?" The room froze. Forks stopped midway, glasses hovered untouched. My son laughed, too loud, too quick. "Of course, Dad, don't worry yourself, everything's already in motion." But I saw it then, the flicker. A flash of unease that crossed his face, gone in an instant, but not before I caught it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single folded page. Not the deed. Not yet. Just a copy of an old letter, my wife's words, written years ago, instructing that the house remain in my care until my passing. I placed it gently on the table, smoothing the creases with my hand. "Your mother had wishes too," I said softly, "and some things aren't so easily erased." He went pale. His wife shifted uncomfortably, her hand tightening around his arm. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, sensing a crack in the foundation of his confidence. But I didn't press further. I didn't raise my voice. I folded the letter back up, slid it into my pocket, and lifted my glass as though nothing had changed. Inside, though, I could feel it. The first tremor of fear in him. The knowledge that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't standing on solid ground. He didn't know the truth yet. Not all of it, but he knew enough to doubt. And that doubt was the seed that would grow into trembling. I let him squirm for a while. He filled the silence with empty promises, his voice sharper now, cracking at the edges. His wife nudged him, whispering that it was fine, that everything was under control. But I knew better. He didn't realize I had been preparing for this moment long before he ever dreamed of betrayal. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood. The room went still. I walked to the oak cabinet by the wall, the same cabinet where I'd kept my most precious memories safe. My hand rested on the drawer, and for a moment I thought of my wife. Her scarf still wrapped around the folder, her voice still echoing in my mind. "Promise me this house will never fall into greedy hands." I whispered back to her, "I kept my promise, love." I pulled out the folder and laid it flat on the table. My son tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. I opened the folder and slid the papers across the wood, my finger tapping the bold letters at the top. Deed of trust. My name. Not his, not anyone else's. Mine. "You can't sell what you don't own," I said, my voice calm, steady. "And you never own this. Not now, not ever." The color drained from his face. His wife's smile shattered, replaced by a frozen stare. The neighbors leaned in, their whispers rippling through the room like wind through dry leaves. But I wasn't finished. From my pocket, I took out the small recorder, the one I had carried for weeks. I pressed play. And there it was, his own voice filling the silence. "Once Dad's out, the deal will move fast. He won't fight, he can't." The words hung in the air like a noose, tightening around his neck. His eyes darted around the table, searching for an escape that didn't exist. His hands shook. He tried to speak, but no sound came. For the first time in his life, he had no words. That's when I leaned closer, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "You tried to bury me, son, but all you did was dig your own grave." And in that moment, he wasn't the man with power. He wasn't the one holding my future. He was just a trembling boy again, stripped bare by his own greed. The room fell into silence, so heavy you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My son's hand hovered over the papers, trembling, but he didn't dare touch them. His wife's face had gone pale, her confidence shattered into 1,000 shards. Even the neighbors, who moments earlier had smiled politely at his plans, sat frozen, their eyes darting between us, unsure if they should breathe. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was as if the truth itself had pressed down on the room, leaving no space for lies. I didn't shout, I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands on the table, looking at the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The man who had tried to strip me of my dignity now sat small, hunched, cornered by his own words and greed. Finally, I broke the silence. My voice was low, steady, but it carried like thunder. This house is not just wood and nails. It is sacrifice. It is love. It is the legacy your mother and I built with our bare hands. You tried to erase that. But respect cannot be stolen. It must be earned. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. For once there was no smirk on his lips, no bravado in his tone, just silence. The kind of silence that admits defeat. Order was restored not with fists, not with shouting, but with proof, with truth. And the truth left him trembling. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade a man can carry. My son thought age made me powerless, but he forgot the strength that comes from truth. Respect cannot be demanded, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be stolen. Respect is earned every day through loyalty and honesty. A man's home is more than bricks. It is his story, his sacrifices, his love. And when someone tries to strip that away, they reveal more about themselves than they ever could about you. Remember this, truth always outlives lies. And loyalty, once broken, is never forgotten. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. It means more than you know to an old man like me. These aren't just tales, they're pieces of life, lessons carved out of pain and silence, victories won without shouting. Now let me ask you, my friends, what would you have done if it were you? If your own child tried to take the home you built with your own two hands? Would you have stayed quiet and waited, or would you have confronted them head-on? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below, because your stories matter too. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear that truth still has power, even in a world full of betrayal. And if you want more stories like this one, stories of resilience, dignity, and justice, you'll find them right here on this channel. Until next time, stay strong, stay wise, stay blessed.